Like the tabernacle and the temple of Solomon, the Arad structure had incense altars, one on either side of the 3 steps that led up to the Holy of Holies. And some of you may have seen that. Some of that's still on the site of Arad, and the Holy of Holies and the incense altars have been removed to the Israel Museum. Aharoni, interestingly, suggested that this very small temple served a small military garrison that occupied the site anciently. So if this small military garrison could have a temple of its own, I don't see why a small group of followers of Nephi couldn't have a temple. In recent years, critics have been claiming that while the Bible has been proven true by archaeologists, no Book of Mormon cities can be identified by name anywhere in the New World. Most archaeologists would not agree with the extravagant claims from the Bible, and the debate between minimalists, those who believe that there is little or no support for the Bible from archaeology, and the maximalists, those who believe there is much archaeological support for the Bible, grows in intensity with each passing year. But let's just deal with the question of identifying sites, which is a rather complex one for both the Bible and the Book of Mormon. Only 55% of the sites mentioned in the Bible have been identified to the satisfaction of most scholars, and many of these are guesses only. For example, in the last century, 3 different archaeological sites were identified as the biblical city of Tvedtnes, which was conquered by Joshua, and the latest identification was made in the late 1970s, while I was living in Israel. It was quite a big thing because when I first took courses in biblical archaeology, one site was being discussed as the site of Tvedtnes, and then before I went to Israel, they switched to another site, said this is a better match. And then when I was in Israel, they switched to a 3rd site. They don't really know. The fact of the matter is they don't really know in most of these places. Some laymen seem to think that the identification of biblical sites is certain, and the names of the sites are actually found there, like modern road signage, now entering Jericho. This is not the case, however. Before the 1930s, no Palestinian site was known from an in situ inscription. And since then, only a handful have been identified by such inscriptions. They are Dan, Jerusalem, Gezer, Lachish, Arad, and Ekron. In fact, one of them, Ekron, was confirmed as recently as the summer of 1996. Arad is a particular problem, for although a bowl with the name Arad inscribed on it was found at the site known by that name to the Bedouin, there are no remains from the time of Moses, Joshua, and the judges on that site as the Bible requires. This led one of the excavators, Yohanan Aharoni, to speculate that another nearby site was the Arad of that time. One thing that has made biblical sites easier to identify is the fact that many of them have retained their ancient names. This is because the conquerors and inhabitants of Palestine or Israel have always spoken related Semitic languages. Thus, the Israelites spoke Hebrew, while the Jews returning from the Babylonian captivity spoke a related language, Aramaic, written with the same alphabet by then. Aramaic was retained as a liturgical language, and in some villages as a spoken language by the early Christians who were converted Jews from that area. The 7th century AD brought the Arabs, whose language is also related to Hebrew. Even during the so-called Latin or Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, the official language was Syriac, an Aramean dialect. The term Latin did not refer to the language used in the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. It referred to the fact that there were Roman Catholics. On the other hand, a number of other languages are spoken in Mesoamerica, where the Nephites and Lamanites lived. And while there have been studies showing that some of them have Hebrew words, they are not Semitic languages. Consequently, the place names in that area are no longer related to Hebrew. So the identification of Book of Mormon words is considerably more complicated. Despite these difficulties, some progress has been made in Book of Mormon geography. There was general agreement amongst serious Book of Mormon scholars that the city of Nephi was at Kamanahulu, outside Guatemala City, and that the city built near the narrow neck of land by the Jaredite king Leib is to be identified with San Lorenzo. 2 Old World sites mentioned in the Book of Mormon, but unknown from the Bible, have also been identified. There is general agreement among Book of Mormon scholars that the site called Bountiful by Lehi's party is in the lush Dhofar region of Oman, in the southeastern part of the Arabian Peninsula. Nahom, the place where Ishmael died, has been identified in the northern part of Yemen, where 3 altars from about Lehi's time, and mentioning the name of that site, have been found. Let's look at some supposed anachronisms in the scriptures. Critics have often taken pleasure in pointing out what they consider to be anachronisms in the Book of Mormon. They note, for example, that Nephi, who lived about 600 BC, had a bow of fine steel, but no such weapons were known at the time. Steel, they contend, is an alloy that was not known to the ancients. The steel blade of Laban's sword is thus also an impossibility for these critics. It is ironic that those who level this criticism against the Book of Mormon fail to take the King James Version of the Bible to task for its use of the term bow of steel in 3 passages. One in Samuel, one in Job, and one in Psalm 18. And the use of the term steel in Jeremiah 15:12. The Hebrew word behind these passages is actually the term used for copper and its alloys, notably bronze. The word steel today is today used to refer to a specific range of iron alloys, but it did not always have that meaning. Steel, as we know it, had not yet been invented by the time the King James Bible was translated. In those days, steel referred to anything hard which could apply to bronze or various other metals, as also to iron. Even in Joseph Smith's day, one of the meanings given in Webster's 1828 dictionary for steel was extreme hardness, while the verbal form means to make hard. We still use that, the verb steel, in that sense. The second entry under the noun steel says that the word is used figuratively for, quote, weapons, particularly of defensive weapons, swords, spears, and the like. Here Liblius pointed out that Nephi's bow was probably a composite weapon, part metal and part wood. He noted that the Canaanite chariots of iron were not solid iron, but merely iron trimmed, and that various other iron tools mentioned in the Bible undoubtedly had wooden handles. If Nephi possessed a composite bow made mostly of wood, this would more readily explain how he could have accidentally broken it. Indeed, the story reminds us of a Bible passage that cites a psalm in which David, who lived 400 years before Lehi, declared, "He teacheth my hands to war, so that a bow of steel is broken by mine arms." That's in 2 Samuel 22, verse 35. Another criticism leveled against the Book of Mormon is the mention of brass plates of Laban. Critics contend that this is an anachronism because brass, a copper-zinc alloy, was not invented until Roman times. The term brass is used 116 times in the Old Testament of the King James Bible to translate the Hebrew term that means copper or bronze. Since the term was in use in the Bible known to Joseph Smith, the argument about the copper-zinc alloy is really pointless. Much ink has been wasted on the argument that Alma 11:5-20 is anachronistic because the first coins were not minted until a century after Lehi supposedly left Jerusalem. While some commentaries have assumed that the passage refers to coins, the text itself does not say that these monetary units were coins. Before stamped coins were invented in the late 6th century BC, pieces of precious metals of varying weight were used as a medium of exchange. It is undoubtedly in this context that we must read of the Nephite monetary system. The most common Israelite unit of weight was the shekel, deriving from the verb meaning to weigh, a word that later denoted a coin of a prescribed weight. Even in Israel today, they have a shekel. Most occurrences of the term shekel are in Exodus through Numbers, with the heaviest concentration in the latter book. This is long before coins were invented in the Middle East. Actually, invented in Lydia, anciently, what's today Turkey. The Hebrew term gerah, which denoted a smaller piece of money, but probably not a coin, is found only in the Old Testament books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Ezekiel. If these were intended to be coins only, then the use of the names in books attributed to Moses would make the Bible anachronistic too. According to the Book of Mormon, Lehi used a compass to guide him in his travels to the New World. Critics are wont to point out that the magnetic compass was discovered in the late Middle Ages in China and was unknown in the ancient Near East. Though the word compass in our day usually denotes a magnetic compass, a magnetic device rather, used to determine the direction of magnetic north, it need not have had that meaning in the Book of Mormon. The word compass may have been the closest equivalent of the original word available to Joseph Smith in the English language. Moreover, compass has several other meanings in English and originally meant circle. Compare, for example, the compass that we use to draw circles. The word compass